United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Any changes to the agenda?
No, Madam Vice Chair.
With that, I'll take a motion.
Motion to adopt the agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Perfect. Consent agenda. Any changes? Anyone want to pull anything? Otherwise, I'll take a motion for that.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
No public hearings, no new business. All right. On to strategy planning.
All right, I'll kick it off. Good evening again, Rebecca Kurtz from Ellers and Shane. You've seen us all before here. And so tonight we're going, oops, I'm sorry. Do I need to start over? Okay. So tonight we are going to have our developer panel talk about multifamily housing. And we're going to talk about it just in a general sense, but we've given them a heads up. Neither, maybe I'm wrong, but to my knowledge, neither one of them specialize in the tax credit or the senior space. You know, if there's questions, we can address that. But like I said, it's going to be a little more of the general sense, talk a lot about the same format as we've done before, talking from the market where it is today, and then bring it down into some specifics that apply with Elko New Market. As in the past, we have some questions prepared, but would welcome you to interject with questions, comments as we move forward with that. So we'll get started here, and I'll do a quick introduction, but then they can expand on their biographies here. Ryan Nolander joined the Hamilton Real Estate Group in 2020, and they are based out of Rochester. Prior to that, he spent 15 years in the economic development sector, both in the city of Rochester and also in Albert Lee. So he has sat on both sides of that table there. Jake is a member of the development team at Ebert Construction, or Ebert Companies, and has a comprehensive background in the development, finance, and construction of the multifamily housing. Just one thing that we do want for full disclosure is that while we're not going to get into any details or anything, Jake has had conversations with different properties or has explored possibly doing some development in the city. And so again, our goal tonight isn't to quiz him on specifics of any of that.
I would love to know.
But we did want to at least disclose that he has been exploring potential opportunities that if something comes out in the future, he will definitely, I'm sure you guys will be the first ones to know. So with that, I don't know if you would like to take a couple minutes and just expand on or add anything, or should we jump right into questions?
No, I think you covered most of, my background's in economic development, 15 years. I'm a recovering economic developer, as I say. So I missed, when I was in Rochester, I missed doing more deals. It was more about raising funds and programming, and I missed doing actual real estate, and that's why I got back into real estate. We do, at Hamilton, do traditional buy-sell leasing, brokerage type work, but we also do developments and manage properties, and so I really appreciate that side of the business. The development side is what makes me wake up in the morning and want to go to work. So great to be here, and appreciate you guys inviting us.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, thanks for having us. Ebert Companies, we predominantly develop multifamily housing, but we do some commercial and light industrial assets as well. And then we're a general contractor kind of across all product types. My background as far as on the development side has been mostly in multifamily, market rate, market affordable, workforce type housing.
Great. Thanks, guys. So we did supply these questions in advance. We'll kind of go through them. Thanks for any work you've done and kind of looking at those and looking around at the market relative to these questions. But we'll kind of start way out macro, like Rebecca said, and we'll kind of zoom in to the city and then talk about some specifics. But maybe Ryan, if you want to start out and just talk about trends in rental housing development. Who are the renters? You know, what kind of units are they looking for? What kind of amenities, building type, and what demographic points are important to you guys? Noting that, again, we're talking more about market rate workforce today, not necessarily LIHTC tax credit projects or the senior space, which, again, Rebecca and I have experience in working, you know, for folks like you, which we can talk about if we want to kind of put that hat on, as Tom and I were talking and Brandon about this beforehand. But anyway, getting off track. Let's just talk about who the renters are and what they're looking for.
Yeah, I didn't mention this before, but we are, much like Ebert, do market rate affordable workforce, but not affordable tax credit projects. So we do similar projects, we just do them in different areas of the state, and Iowa and Wisconsin we're working in. But, you know, when we're looking at it right now, you know, the question was about, like, who are the renters? To us, it varies depending on the community. You know, things that when we're doing projects around Rochester, we're seeing more male-type employees, nurses, PTs, professionals. We did a project in Dodge Center that's a little bit more blue-collar. You see a mix of that. We're doing one right now in Faribault. So it kind of depends on the community and what your base is. You know, we look for seniors. We've seen some seniors trying to move into our projects, trying to get out of their existing homes, which is actually a great way to create affordable housing, you know, naturally occurring affordable housing. They want to get out. They don't want to have to mow the yard, move snow, do those type of things. So we've seen some more of that type of transition. The hard part with the senior community and when it comes to senior projects is they look at, well, currently we don't have a mortgage, or we're paying this much, and then they're going to move out and they're going to be paying maybe more in rent or whatever the costs are associated with it. So it's always a balancing act with them as, you know, what's the expense versus what I'm currently paying, and can it make sense to move out of my existing house. Types of units, a lot of times what we're focusing on is studios, one bedrooms. We do some one-bedroom dens just because of the work from home. That's been really good for people to have a space to actually have a desk. And then two bedrooms being 2-bedroom, 1 bath, 2-bedroom, 2 baths. We don't do a lot of 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms. Most of our projects are capped at 2 bedrooms and 2 baths when we're doing them. So we like to, amenities, we always put laundry in our rooms. We want to make sure everybody has laundries. Fitness room, make sure we have high-speed internet for those work from homers or gamers, anybody that's a gamer. And also nice to provide a community room, like a dog park, certain things like that. We also look for, when it comes to locations and site characteristics, wanting to be around, typically near some amenities, you know, food, beverage, groceries, entertainment, or a downtown where you can have some walkability to different things that might be around downtown. Those are kind of things that we're looking for when it comes to a location. Obviously, if we can find a site that's nice and clean and flat, that also helps us when it comes to excavating. And then demographics that we look at that are important to us, you know, a growing community. We want to see population going up, not down. We'd like to see job base nearby or job base in the community growing. We look at, you know, is there demand? Housing study, I looked at your guys' housing study. It looks like there's some demand. I know there's been some projects built recently. And then, of course, number one priority for us is, do we have a supportive community, supportive staff, supportive elected officials? You know, if that's there, that is always the number one key. You know, when we come in to talk to communities, we talk about partnership, and it's got to make sense for us. It's got to make sense for the community. And we want to be able to share and both have a benefit from doing a project like this. So, jump in.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ryan.
I might have taken all your hits, so.
Yeah, I mean, much of the same, really. Sometimes we'll do 3 bedrooms. I mean, it's very market specific.
Yeah.
You know, that'd be a difference. We found 1-bedroom dens in a lot of places to be pretty popular, you know, for the work from home singles or a couple that just wants a little extra space. I'd say like unit types kind of vary depending on the year, you know, shifts in preferences and market and demand, but, we typically just like to keep those pretty balanced across an Elko studio, you know, sometimes up to 3-bedroom units, 2 bedrooms, 1 dens, pretty balanced across the board, because, you know, as preferences shift, we'll have something for somebody. A lot of our past projects, the demographics are pretty wide ranging, I'd say, from, you know, single, you know, young people and young couples to people downsizing, and just don't want the maintenance and, you know, of varying ages as well. I think there's also a shift sometimes where there's more renters by choice than like renters by necessity in a lot of these too, where people, yeah, they don't want the house anymore and they can afford to own a house or want, you know, any type of house they want, but they just want to rent too. So I think we're seeing a little bit more of that too, where people want to live in an apartment. And some, you know, there's a community around there sometimes and just have the flexibility, so.
Are you seeing that with the younger generation, the 18 to 23-year-olds, that they are renting more than actually going out and purchasing? So the demand for multi-family is greater now than housing?
I think that's probably a fair assessment, you know, a lot of times I think that's driven by what's happened in the single-family market, where the costs have gone up and the price for existing homes when they go on the market are now here instead of here. And so I think it's made it hard for that group to say, hey, I'll go buy a home and I'll pay $2,500 a month in a mortgage or $2,200 a month instead of paying, you know, $1,200, $1,300 for an apartment. So, but I do see that that's what's happened, is there's just been more of that younger generation doing the renting. Part of it's driven by cost, part of it's driven by what you said, is they just, you know, that dream that a bunch of us always had when we were younger, like own your own home and build equity. And I just don't know if the younger generation has that much, you know, some of them do obviously, but not everybody's looking at that saying, that's my goal. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of times too, I think there's demand for single family and rental housing, but a lot, like right now, it feels like people are kind of on hold and waiting, especially younger too. I mean, there's a lot going on in the world and renting can be expensive, homes are expensive, I mean, cost to own, I mean, everything's going up. So I think a lot of people, especially in that 18 to 23, are just moving back home right now too. You know, and I think their next step after leaving, you know, the parents' house would be renting for a while. And then I think it's getting pushed out further and further if they do want to buy a house. I think the average age is now 40. I think people hear that. So, you know, they'd maybe be renting for 15 years and then they'd buy a house. So.
Yeah, I think you said it, 40, and I had heard that on the radio the other day on one of my economics podcasts that I listened to. It's, you know, the first-time homebuyer age is trending dramatically older, like shockingly. So
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about Elko New Market as a market. Maybe Jake, you can go first this time. And so talk about what types of rental development could be anticipated. Both the type of development, the size, how this might evolve over time. You know, I know you're actively looking, so you've obviously done a little bit of homework there, which is great. You know, we can use that homework that you've done to kind of inform these guys of what you've been seeing out there.
Sure. Yeah, I guess from my perspective, you know, I think there's a demand for like a market rate or like market affordable, you know, call it workforce housing, just kind of average rental, you know, not top of the line, like luxury, really high-end Class A, but, you know, if we're talking about classes, it'd be like Class A minus, B plus, you know, attainable type rental housing, I think would kind of fit the bill on some of like the properties that are zoned for multifamily here. And I'd say not too dissimilar to probably what Old Town Apartments has done in terms of how they've phased that with 36 units and then another building. I think another project or two of that similar size at a time feels appropriate, where it's probably, 30 to 50, 60 units of that type of housing on some of these properties. And then, kind of keep, as the city grows and continues to expand, there maybe be more of that. I don't foresee like a big, you see these really, really big apartment buildings, 150, 200 units, like I don't foresee that making sense in Elko New Market. That's just kind of my evaluation as I've looked at a few properties here and had discussions with staff. And, we did a project last fall, it opened last fall in New Prague, similar market, similar, close by, and that's 54 units. And that felt very appropriate, for the, the area too. So I think something similar makes sense.
What was the lease-up timeline in that project in New Prague?
Still leasing up right now, opened last October. We're 75% leased, so I'd say pretty average, maybe a little slower than we had expected. What we're finding there, and might be similar here, is that people are waiting. That's where I kind of made that comment of people are waiting. So there's a lot of people that are interested, but they need to sell a house. That's where the downsizing comes in. So, there's a 3 to 4 month lag in demand and moving in. Maybe they can't even sell their house because it goes back to that, people are waiting. So want to sell the house, maybe can't. So people kind of are on hold and not necessarily moving as much as they were, but they want to, they just aren't. So lease up's been good, but just maybe a little bit slower than we had initially thought, just with no other buildings there, so.
Can I ask a question? What do you find is the percentage of age ranges in that particular building?
Probably like early 20s to 80.
And is there a specific, group of ages that you're finding more of, or are there?
I think
all over?
it's a little bit all over, but I'd say it's a little bit tailored towards people that are downsizing. So 60 to 80 is what we're finding. The building's called Bohemia Flats. So I think it is maybe tailored toward a little bit of an older demographic versus a younger demographic there.
Was that intentional, Jake, or is that just a result of did you intentionally target those groups, or is that just the way it's panned out naturally or organically?
That's just the way it's panned out. It's just a general occupancy, market rate building. And, we designed it in a way that it kind of is tailored towards anybody, young or older demographic. But I think just based off of the demographics of New Prague and what people are looking for, probably live there 30, 40 years, want to downsize, and now they have an option in New Prague. But it's just a matter of selling a house. There's been a couple cases I know there of residents that have moved to New Prague from way up north, like in Cambridge. And that's because they have kids that live in Montgomery. So I think there's some of that too, where, they live here half the year, and then maybe they live somewhere else in Florida or something. But they've downsized, they want to be close to family that lives in the area, and, just empty nesters. So, but yeah, we did not really expect that or plan that necessarily.
Are you finding the rents about the same relative to New Prague that you might find here, compared to maybe Lakeville? Or is there a scaling of rents, or are they pretty similar generally?
I'd say Elko, New Market, and New Prague are pretty similar. The rents at Bohemia Flats are pretty similar to Old Town apartments. And they would be less than Lakeville. There's some, I'd say, higher end buildings are just generally higher rents in Lakeville than in where we are. So, and just a little, and that's just, we're just one step further from, yeah, so.
Right?
Just
Yeah.
build off that a little bit. He talks about the class level of apartments we build. We build what we call a good B+. A-minus project, just like you guys. We don't do hard top surfaces for countertops, but we do, nice LVP for flooring and make nice stainless steel appliance packages and stuff. But the senior thing is, it is interesting, almost on every project that we've built recently, the first handful of leases signed are seniors. They're the first ones looking at the property, picking out the best units for themselves. We actually just did a remodel of a old hospital in La Crosse. And the first couple, and it's right across the street from UWL, thinking this community is gonna be younger, shaded. I mean, it's right there. And the first person that leased was a 65-year-old woman. I'm like, she either likes to party or, I mean, I don't know, but it's gonna be a unique mix, but we are seeing a bunch of that, shifting towards a little bit more of the senior, downsizing, getting out, and they're the first ones that are calling us and trying to get in there. I'm trying to think what else we talked about. We talked a little bit about timelines of leasing up. It is taking a little bit longer, I think, for lease ups right now, just because of what you said. I think people are on hold, taking their time. When you talk about timelines as far as developments, you get into talking about market rate versus affordable tax credit type projects. In our world, you're typically 18 to 20 months to get through the PA sign, get through the process, get the project actually closed into the ground, and then starting leasing up. I've got a tax credit project right now back in Rochester. I'm just representing the landowner. I'm selling the land. We signed on that tax credit project, we signed the PA in October of 2024. And they may close on the purchase of the land here in September or October. And then it's gonna be a 3.5 year deal from start to finish, just because of the process to get through the tax credit stuff. The reason I bring that up is for ourselves, and I think for Ebert too, when we come to a community and talk about the partnership and can we work together on different incentives, different things that can be, different reliefs that can help. We do, our rents are still, what would you call the affordable rents? I mean, if you looked at the affordable chart and it tells you, hey, here's what you gotta charge or less, or just based on what these units are, we're already in that range. And we build projects that, we're building projects where our per square foot or our per unit cost is $175,000 a unit. And you're hearing about these affordables being $350,000, $450,000, $400,000 up to $500,000 a unit, because of all the extra costs and all the extra fees and everything else they build in there. So we as market rate people can build you as a community affordable projects, something that's gonna be affordable for people in the community to rent, but we need partnerships from the community to make that work. So that's, a lot of the times why we talk about that, so.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Is there like a certain ratio or percentage of single family to rental that for a community our size you feel is appropriate? Or is there a certain percentage that would deter you from coming in, there's too much or it's not enough, it's untested, or?
You wanna jump in?
Sure. There is a limit, I would say, and there's, at least at a given time. That's where I kind of talked about the size of a project at a given time, what would feel appropriate. But yeah, I'd say the multifamily would probably stay a lower percentage of the single family houses in the market. I think now it's 2 or 3% and maybe up to 5% would feel adequate to me. Again, that's maybe just my thoughts on it. But yeah, I don't know if there's a right or wrong percentage. I think as single family would grow, there'd be a need for the multifamily along with it.
Yeah.
But that would probably stay about that same percentage, I would say. I don't know.
Well, and a lot of times, our decisions as developers are based a lot of times on a housing study. The Scott County Housing Study from 2022 says you guys need 144 market rate units. 72 have just been built, 36 and 36. Half of that's already been built out. So is there room for another 75 or is there room for another 175? It's hard to tell. An example of this, we built a project in Casson, Minnesota, and we built 52 units there and we were nervous about building 52 units in Casa, Minnesota. We're like, do we do that or not? We kick ourselves every day that we didn't build 75. But you just never know. You get into the market, all of a sudden it leases up and there's a wait list, and you're like, well, we should have built 75 and now we can't because it does, you can't build another 20. That doesn't make any sense. So it's hard, but we look at for us, we're looking at housing studies, trying to get a grasp of what's already in the community and try to understand that absorption. That project out there, the reason they built 36 more, because the other 36 filled up. So that's why it happens, so.
So what could Elko New Market do to position itself for more multifamily? Ryan, you've talked, maybe you want to take this one and start out. You talked about it a little bit, a couple times actually, about the community being a partner with incentives and things like that. But maybe kind of dissect that a little bit more. Talk about incentives. Obviously, those are important, and we deal with those all the time. But talk about the other things. You talked about communities being a partner. What does that mean?
Yeah, and that's, I guess the number one thing is the community making the decision that it's important to you and that you want to do it. And if it is a priority of something that you really would like to have done, communicate that with developers when they come in. And then have reasons for, here's how important it is to us. And we're willing to do X, Y, and Z. Some of those incentives that we talk about, tax increment financing. I will say tax increment financing, when it comes to housing side, then you've got to follow the rules of incomes and rents and stuff, and that gets to be for the management company a little more burdensome just because they've got to keep track of that. So if there's a way to do a tax increment financing district that's an economic development district instead of housing, Shane just worked on one of these for me in Faribault and helped us through that process, and we did it that way through an economic development. We still, you got to find a need for it, and you got to answer all the but-for questions. But TIF is important. If you can't do TIF, we always like to talk about abatement. Abatement to me, when I worked in economic development and was working for communities, I liked abatement better because you can structure it. You could say, for your first 5 years, we're going to give you 90% of your taxes abated. The next 3 years are going to be 80, and the next 2 years are going to be 50, and you can do different things like that. There's a little more flexibility. The hard part from the developer side is abatement isn't as universal as TIF, where school district, county, city are all included. You have to go to each taxing jurisdiction and ask them. I don't like going to the school district and saying, hey, can you give me money? Because they already are struggling for money. So it becomes a little harder to work in that abatement world, but if you can get a good city and county that are willing to partner with you, that becomes a little more flexible. The other thing that is good for us, and it's probably for you, is if the city has sites that they own, that they have under control, can we work on a discounted sale price? Or we did a project in Byron, Minnesota, and they sold us the project, and then once the project was built, they refunded back our sales price so that we didn't just buy it and sit on it. We actually had to perform and build the project. Can you waive fees? Can you waive certain fees for us? Sewer and water access charge fees, different things that add up. There's a variety of things that you can do, but those are kind of the things that we look at when we come in and are saying, is there a way we can work together to make it work for you guys as well as us? If you have anything to add to that.
Maybe Jake, if there's things you wanted to add to that, great. But maybe talk a little bit about the planning and entitlement process and sand in the gears versus lubrication.
I think from on the city side, it really is a partnership, and I mean that's the only way these things get done is everybody working together. But I think if everybody on the city side is aligned, commission and staff and council are all kind of have the same shared vision and goal. That's where these are a little bit smoother, and they are streamlined in a way, and there's less issues and hiccups. So I think that's where, that makes a huge difference. And if there is a targeted area too, a lot of these times it's like redevelopment. you know, if the city's like, this is where we want to see these types of projects, and this is why, and there's kind of, you know, again, these like shared ideas and goals. And here's where to focus, and here's where we can come in and, you know, provide some incentives, because this is what we want to see here, and, yeah, especially on the city-owned land too. I mean, that's huge if the city can get aggressive and buy some land or EDA-owned properties. I mean, I think that's huge, and that again just goes back to, it streamlines everything, and it doesn't take 2 to 4 years to get a project completed. It'd be more like a year or less, and then you can be under construction. I think that all is very impactful.
Anything to add, Ryan, on the lubrication versus sand front?
Well, I know you got a question later that talks about good versus bad cities. I will tell you that the worst thing that can be is a community that says that they're, you know, this is a priority and they're behind you, and then you get into a public hearing and that's not what happens. So that's the friction that you're talking about, is that situation. So that's why I talked about, if it's a priority, communicate it's a priority, show that it's a priority. If it's not a priority, that's okay. We're not gonna build in every community. If it doesn't work for both sides, it doesn't work. But the worst situations are when you get brought in, yep, and then you get in front of a public, setting, and they're like, oh, sorry, that's not what we want, and you ticked off the entire neighborhood, and the community looks at you and goes, what are you doing? And, but that's, yeah, just make sure you communicate what you really want.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground already, and that's good. But what are some of the biggest mistakes that cities can make when they're looking at targeting development, right? Yeah, Jake, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think it's not sharing the same ideas is the biggest thing. I think if everybody's on the same page, that's very important. Like, this is what the city wants, and this is the direction coming from, the mayor and council to planning commission and staff. I mean, I think that really is the biggest thing, and where there's mistakes is just that misalignment. And, everything is going well. These are expensive to do, so you're just spending money in design and drawings, and you get to a meeting and everything flips, and I think if something starts getting contentious, you have to maybe stand up for what the city really wants too. If this is the city's goal, I think the communication needs to expand beyond, into the community too, and see what the community wants, but then also here's our direction that we think the city is going and what we want and what the market will dictate, and stick to that too. I think just, it's not always easy, but if this is where we're going, kind of keep going with that.
Yeah, and to add on to that, the things that can really get hard from our side of the table is dragging out decisions, tabling things, punting them, pushing out, because that screws up then when our equity raises and our financing and all that stuff and the timing of all that. The other thing that gets frustrating is we work in multiple communities and you all do it a different way. And the worst thing I ever had someone say to me is, well, just go do it online. Like, if you're a city staff member, if you're interested, help us. We can still go do it online, but hey, here's what you gotta go do here, here's what you're gonna need. Help us understand the process, because we don't know how you want it. Every community is different. So be willing to guide us and kind of hold our hand a little bit and help us through the process if we have questions, instead of saying, well, it's online. That's just not an answer that is acceptable when we're trying to, we're spending tens of millions of dollars in trying to put these projects in your community. And so we just have, let's work together, so.
I'm gonna switch gears a little bit. So, go ahead.
Just curious, your recent experiences, there's certain large commercial facilities now that nobody wants. And I'm sure anybody wanting to do one of those is hearing it when they go in or scared when they go in. Are you finding any of that kind of conversation in the residential market that you're dealing in, where there are just certain things that you're running into that you know is, I gotta do this carefully because they're not gonna like it?
Not, yeah,
I was gonna
go
say,
ahead.
my answer would be, if the community's not so maybe it's a neighborhood that says we aren't supportive of this, or, obviously then we don't wanna be in that situation. So we hopefully would be working with the community that would say, this could be a little contentious, and then we gotta weigh, is that worth it? As far as your question, were you talking about existing facilities that are becoming available to retrofit them, or what were you?
Not necessarily, but I was referring to the data center stuff, where you've got organized, I was trying to be kind, because you hate to say that word in public anymore, but, it's an organized effort that wherever you're going to talk about that, you're going to get,
Feedback, yeah.
I'm not aware of anything with housing, but I'm just curious if you guys are coming across anything in housing, not quite as vehement, but at least something that gets people riled up, other than NIMBY.
Yeah, I think the data center thing is interesting, because I had a city council meeting in Faribault recently where I was going in to finalize, I think it was a final CUP. And I walked in, the whole place was packed. And I'm like, oh my God, what am I running? And I've been in like 3 meetings already. There's been no confrontation. There's been no discussion. Well, I found out they were talking about data centers that night. And so that one actually was good for us, because they ignored me and they worked on that. But, again, we try not to, with our world, the market rate world, a lot of times there's not a lot of contention. It's more around the affordable. When people hear like tax credit projects, they think it's Section 8. They think it's really low income. Those tax credit projects aren't. They're really nice projects. They just have to find the right population to fill them. But in the market rate world, most of the time we can overcome that just by answering the question. I mean, that council meeting, that one question I did get was, is this an affordable project? And we're like, well, it's not an affordable, tax credit project, but we want to keep the rents affordable. So in my world, I don't see a lot of that, but I don't know about you.
Yeah. I think that with the housing, the challenge, I mean, a lot of times we're talking about the partnerships and the city incentives like TIF. I think there's always a little bit of pushback or, contention around TIF, and a misconception on what it is and how it's used and why it's used for these projects. A redevelopment TIF, there would be no affordability requirement in the true sense of affordability. But with a housing TIF district, just for example, there's a component of a certain percentage of the units need to be affordable at a certain level. And, you look at those incomes and rents, and you're like, that's really not what a lot of people would say is affordable even. I think there's that misconception too, like with TIF and what that means and how it's used. But we're talking about affordability, it's not low, it's, I'd say, more like attainable or like normal, average type of affordability. But yeah, there's always the questions and the contention around the use of TIF especially, or tax abatement. So I'd say on the housing front, that would be yeah.
Yeah, so what Ryan said earlier, we see a lot too. So workforce housing is generally thought of as 80% of area median income. 60% AMI is the threshold for a lot of the TIF districts and for the LIHTC, low-income housing tax credit projects, and lower. When you get to 50% AMI and 30% is certainly deeply affordable. Those projects need a lot of subsidy in order to make it work.
Correct.
So the farther you go down that scale, the more subsidy that you need, be it from tax credits or grants or TIF or abatement, et cetera, or whatever. The tax credit projects that we see have 10, 15 different funding sources. And so they have to line up all those, and that's part of the reason why they get so expensive, is because you've got to manage 10 or 15 different funding sources, and every one of those groups has a different set of requirements, and there's lots of overhead, the cost, as Ryan said, I mean, I had one that was over $700,000
Crazy.
per unit for a deeply affordable project, which is, it was in Hennepin County, but it was nuts, right? So, but 400,000 or 500,000 is not uncommon anymore. So, anyway, let's talk about incentives and what drives the need for them. Talk a little bit about cost and inflation. Obviously, we're all watching the inflation numbers lately. I know that just CPI is up at around 4 point something these days. That's normal inflation. Construction inflation has traditionally outpaced CPI, I think, for decades, which just leads to this whole conversation about late home ownership, right? And people just paying a lot for rent and not being able to afford a home. You know, all those things coalesce together to make gaps in projects different. But, you know, maybe talk a little bit generally about costs and inflation and thereby interest rates and what you're seeing just lately with the war, maybe being over with the Strait and, you know, all that stuff going on. Like, how much volatility is there in the lending and equity markets? Do you want to start, Jake?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the need for these incentives is, I mean, from a, I guess, simple way to look at it, I mean, there's just such a delta between rents and, you know, the affordable rents and not only the costs it is to build and construct these, you know, with everything up 30 to 50% in the last 5 years, really. I mean, you got interest rates in there too, but the general inflation on construction costs is, yeah, 30 to 50% a lot of times. And then keeping rents at a level that people are interested in renting, so you have a big gap there. And then once the building's open, everything that it takes to operate the buildings has also increased 25, 30 or more percent across the board. So that's where you're getting more and more of this need for tax abatement, TIF, or other things. You know, land has gone way up, or expectations on what the land costs are from sellers who are interested in selling has gone way up, and those are holding. If the market has gone down and the expectations are different, that seems to be holding, and people are kind of waiting for, I don't know, but just kind of sticky there. So, yeah, that's, I think, you know, I don't know when and if that'll change, but as it is now, I mean, there's just such a big gap between the rents and everything that it takes to build and develop and operate these projects. And I think the same could be said a lot of times for single-family housing too. I mean, it's pretty hard to find something that's less than $500,000 that's new now. And I think those, you know, the nationals or the regionals have a lot of the same problems that we're seeing on the rental side. Same costs, same land restrictions, everything. So, yeah, that's.
Regulation has increased costs, you know, different things like that in the single-family world.
Mm-hmm.
So, in our world.
Yeah, building codes continue to change. I mean, that's where, again, like, you just have general inflation in the construction costs, but then as, you know, state and other building codes change, more insulation, you know, heating, cooling, I mean, it's just, everything just, it costs a lot more.
Correct. To build off that a little bit, the other thing that sometimes in the public's eye, when they see TIF or abatement, they just look and they say, well, those greedy developers, they want to make more money. And a little bit, you know, of how the sausage is made there, in our world, we go out and we invest as developers, we bring our money into it, but we also go out and get a pool of people to be equity as part of that. Well, they do need a return. And when interest rates have gone up, they can look at us and they go, well, if you can only get me 5.5% or 6%, and I've got to tie my money up for 18 months and I'm going to have no return until you lease this building up, I can go put my money in a money market and get almost 4%. And so you do have to look at that and say, well, that's how these projects get made. And so we've got to be able to give them a return. But the bigger thing has become with us on the financing side, where the banks are, you know, they've got ratios, debt coverage ratios that you got to meet. And most of them are around 1.25. You know, that's what they're looking to do until you're at least stabilized. And it's hard to meet those ratios based on the cost that you talk about without it's that balancing, you know, we could meet them, but we're gonna have to charge this much in rents, and that's not affordable for the community. It's also how many people can afford that, and how does that affect the underwriting by the bank? So when we ask for it, it's not because we're trying to get greedy and get rich. It's because we've got to balance the financing, the investors, all of the cost and everything, and that's the, you know, behind the scenes why we have to do this, so.
And, you know, you mentioned earlier, I mean, these projects take a long time, and there's significant risks along the way too. You know, and there's investments from the private side, from the developers. Day one almost, you know, a few $100,000 is typically spent getting a project designed and entitled before it's even starting construction.
Correct.
And then, so you have risk along the way there, and then, you know, risk during construction, and then risk during lease up. So I mean, that's where you're kind of talking about the capital and why there's that need and that gap still. You know, like a lot of people wouldn't take that significant risk to do these if there wasn't a little bit more return than you could get in a bank account. So there's, again, that delta, but, you know, and going back to the size of projects, you could build 75 units and then nobody wants them, you know? So I mean, it gets a little scary signing sometimes, you know, but it's risky.
So just a side note, because earlier we were talking about affordability, and I just did some quick Googling, or ChatGPT, but when we're talking 80% of AMI, 60% of AMI, so I wasn't able to find Scott County, because we use Scott County AMI specifically, but metro area AMI, so average median income, is 131,500. So that's the average median income. So when they're talking about people who can afford rent at 60% of AMI in the metro area, and it's gonna be a little higher, I think, in Scott County. You're talking somebody's making $79,000 a year. I'm also living on 79,000. If you're talking 80%, you're talking $105,000 a year. So when we looked at this as a community in the past, when you're looking at the rents and the affordability, the people that are in here actually aren't even your 18 and 19-year-olds. They are, but they're like your 27-year-old police officer
Yeah.
or teacher. We had a police officer that we hired a couple years ago. He could not afford to live in town. He had to go find something affordable in Lakeville because he couldn't afford to live in the community. So affordability, but in fairness, affordability is defined in a lot of different ways, and it depends on the nature of the project and sometimes on the tools you might be using to fund the project. But just keep in mind when people are saying affordability, it's not low income
Correct.
housing. It's affordability for the average, affordable for the average person in a lot of cases.
Our rule of thumb when we're doing our calculations and analysis is looking at the AMI and other information that we know about the community and saying they can pay up to 30% of their income as housing. And so if that number doesn't work with the rent structure, then it's just probably not gonna work, but
Yeah, so
that's what we,
So 60% of that 79, that would be basically almost $2,000 a month total all in for their housing.
Correct.
And that's not just rent.
that's everything,
That's everything.
yeah.
Yeah,
You know, in a lot of markets too, you know, talking about 60-80% AMI, a lot of times the market rents are more of like a 60% AMI level. So like that's market. So yeah, you're talking about affordability, that's,
Well, and
It-
I have my number one trait's analytical, so I have the chart. And you look at the rents based on 60% AMI that he's just talking about. A studio, rent based on 60 AMI is $1,381. Well, we don't charge that for a studio in a community like this. One bedrooms are $1,480, which is a little higher than what we normally charge, and then two bedrooms are almost $1,800. So like he talks about, we're trying to structure projects that already create affordable without having to be tax credit projects that are gonna take 3.5, 4 years to do. So,
and that's a point that we make with developers sometimes too, is that, you know, if there's a financial gap in the project, exactly what Ryan just went through, 60% AMI rents, which are what you need, at least a portion of them, to qualify for a housing TIF district, are already what they're gonna charge for market. So it's really not burdensome to the developer in a way, in order to hold those rents, yes, there's admin costs. And sometimes there's, in the areas outside the metro, there's a little delta and there's a cost to it, right? You're not able to get all the way up to where maybe your rents are really like at 65%. So there's a little cost to the TIF district there. But you, of course, then can recycle some of that property taxes to help buy down the project and help it be financeable. Because I think the biggest thing, and I'd like to hear from you guys too on, interest rates. A couple of years ago, interest rates were just a lot lower, and this gets into the whole profitability metrics, Ryan, that you were talking about. If you can, I always say, if you can take your money and you're not even just invest it in a money market, that's pretty low investment, 3 or 4% these days. But you want to buy an index fund, might get you, 5 to 10%, right? And it's pretty sound investment. Maybe on an internal rate of return basis, you can make, 15 or so on a real estate project, but is it worth the risk? And as your interest rates get higher, that delta between your 15% internal rate of return on an apartment project and your 8% you can get in money, that as regular interest rates get higher, these other rates don't go as high, and so that as that gap shifts, it just makes these projects harder to pencil.
Yeah,
Any other thoughts?
I think you covered it. I mean, that was, that was what I was gonna say. So, but to talk about the one thing when it comes to the affordability projects, tax credit projects, or the TIF, our argument has never been about the rents. We can make the rents work. The argument we run into is about the income limits. If you look at Scott County's 60% AMI, the income limits by household, so a household of 2 is $63,000. Well, that means you need to have 2 people in that house that are making less than $63,000 to qualify as the affordable thing. And we ran into situations where we can keep the rents low, but we have a hard time finding the people that meet that income limit. And that's the hard part for us. Get rid of the developer side, go to the management side. That's the hard part for us, is trying to find those people that fit that income limit. And then what happens is the bank starts going, well, why do you have 15 units open? It's like, well, because they've got to be in this income limit and we can't. And they go, well, you've got a waiting list for, 25 people that are wanting to get in there. And we're like, well, we can't do that because of this rule. So I just wanted to give you a little input behind why the affordability becomes interesting. So, Tom.
So we're drifting into the area of incentives. So, and I know this might be a complex question to answer because every community is different, every project is different. But what percentage of projects require some form of assistance to get it done, or what types of markets require it? Because, I've heard at presentations on housing, it's like, you can't do multifamily housing unless you provide assistance. It just, the numbers are upside down, it just doesn't work. But we have a project just that happened down the street and it worked just fine. So can you enlighten us from a rural perspective how that actually works?
I'm going to let you jump in, but it's funny you said that because we were just talking about that project before we went live. And we're like, I don't know how they're doing it. Did they own the land? I don't know. Did they put more, the only way to make those work and get the return you need to pay for everything is maybe they put a bunch more equity in and they're not financing as much. Maybe that's what they're doing, but we couldn't figure it out because we can't pencil anything out without some assistance from the communities. It just doesn't work for my structure, and I don't know about yours.
Yeah, I think at that point, I mean, you aren't able to get the other financing sources that make sense for an equity or a debt, a bank to do the project. Yeah, it's a great question how others do it. I've seen unique circumstances where sometimes people just want to do something in their community and they want to own something where they live. I don't know. But yeah, I would say almost every project would need something at this point, unless you are charging rents that are well above, I'd say, an average affordable or market rate. Yeah. And I think, I've kind of looked at the numbers before, and I think on average, your rents would need to be close to $2,300 across the building on average for a project to make sense where you wouldn't need an incentive, which oftentimes it's probably about $800 a month per unit on average, more than like what the market would justify. So there's a big delta there, and that's where the TIF would come in.
Correct.
Tom, we run into this sometimes too, where I just had a conversation with a developer this week, happens to be in Wisconsin, but where the numbers look pretty bad, and they were asking for TIF, and even after the TIF, the numbers still looked pretty bad. In fact, he was showing negative cash flow, and so I asked him, why he was doing this project. As an aside, when I adjusted things, which we often do, I could get it to look better, but not maybe as good as you would want it to look. And his response was, well, I'm kind of doing this for my grandkids, right? So sometimes these developers are playing the long game, and they're banking on holding for a really long time, and maybe them being the only game in town, and they're going to make money later, right? They're not looking at a 5 or 10 year. Maybe they're just trying to, set their family up. So it does happen sometimes, but fundamentally, they're just making less money than the regular market would bear. So it does happen from time to time. There's one just down the street from my house where I live in Bloomington, where there isn't any subsidy, when most of the projects in the metro are have subsidy, and that does have an affordability component, which is required by that city. So, it does happen sometimes, but they sometimes have different math, and sometimes they're trying to park money, and they can get tax benefits, right, to depreciate the asset if they've got other things going on, and so sometimes there's those below the line things that they're thinking about too.
Yeah.
Well, as I say, we have some of our older investors actually are doing exactly what you're saying. They're getting in, and it's a balancing act with the investment group to say, do we want to sell? Do we want to stabilize? Mostly we're a buy and hold, but there's some of us that are saying, hey, maybe we want to sell and then go do another project. The older ones are saying, I don't want it, because what's going to happen is when I pass away, it's going to go to my heir, and they're going to get a stepped up basis, and they're not going to have a tax burden, and they're going to have this gift that I'm giving to them. And they're not worried about the current situation. They're worried about their grandkids and their children and things like that. So,
Yeah. And when I've seen other projects like that, I think what Shane was saying too is that, if there's a company that does do that, they're the developer, the property manager, the builder. They probably have, I know there's a company in Minnesota that, they have a family that is an HVAC contractor. So they're literally doing every single piece of the project. So it makes sense for them because they're making money as a subcontractor, as a general contractor, as the property manager along the way. Where like, if you look at the project as a whole, it probably doesn't make money. You're better off in your checking account, right, with your money. But they're making money from all these other, because it's everything internal, So I've seen that as an example, and maybe that's a case where that can happen. But I'd say those are kind of one-offs, or it's not the norm.
So the other thing we've talked about on these other panels is the effect of the intersection. So the way you get to the cities here. And there's a lot of talk about redoing the intersection. Do you think that has a big effect on multifamily? Obviously there's an intersection there, and that's the most important thing. You can get off the freeway and get there. You can work in Lakeville, you can work in Burnsville, whatever. But the quality of that intersection, do you think that has any effect on multifamily around here?
Access is hugely important. So, if it helps the access and I guess the overall flow of traffic for others that are, whether they're entering a building or not, or just passing by, I think that is very impactful.
I had the luxury of coming off of 35 from the south and trying to get across. My kids, thank God, were in the car, because it was one of those, I sat there and I sat there and I sat there, and I finally just had to pull out and get ahead of somebody to get across to the other side. That was, there's something maybe has to be done up there, because you got a stop sign on the west side, but not on the east side, and the east side's like, do a little prayer and go. So, it helps, but if you have to sit there for an extra 5 minutes, it's not going to make or break whether something happens. I think, just having being able to get from the metro or from, some people don't always go north, some go south. Some go towards Faribault, Owatonna, some go towards the north. So being able to get there, if you can make it easier, great. That's always nice. But again, I think it just comes down to, is there demand and is there a supportive community that can help you, make it a success?
I would assume that if we're looking at family income, that it might be higher here than in some of the more rural communities that you're building in. So then the question becomes, the cost of building, other than maybe the land, shouldn't be that much different to build it here rather than, down in Wells, Minnesota, which is a nice town, but farther away and not as good demographics and not as great a potential. So the question is, as you move closer in to the core, the need for the subsidies, from my perspective, might diminish just because there's more desirability of building there. Or is that not true?
I don't know if it's desirability of building there, but I think you're on the right path, that you can probably charge a little higher rent than you can charge in Wells, Minnesota. Colonel Days is coming up, feel free to stop on down, but that's where I think, but I still think even if you can charge a little higher rent, it's not enough to cover the gap that's come from the economics of having to build a project and get it under contract and get all the entitlements done and get all that work. I think those stay pretty constant between communities when it comes to that stuff. It's gonna cost me the same as for architecture and engineering, unless it's a really hard site. It's, maybe we can charge a little bit more rent, but it's still not gonna be enough, so.
Right. Yeah, the costs to develop are similar, kind of around the state.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of what the market rents justify in a certain market.
Yeah.
And as you get further away, they're lower, and that gap widens. As you get closer in, you can justify charging more rents, and that gap is a little bit less.
Yeah.
And there's also, the balance of demand. I mean, in a bigger community, there's more population, you can draw from other communities, so I think it's all a balance of what you can charge. The building is the same, but it's a matter of what you can charge and the demographics in a community.
And I guess the question is, bottom line, are we relatively a little better off, so therefore we might relatively expect that we might need a little less incentive? Not trying to hammer on anybody, just
Yeah.
curious. I mean, because just as a business person, I'd look at it and say, well, it's a more desirable place to put a building because the city is gonna grow. There's more people here, the higher the income, therefore I can charge more rent. So if I'm cash flowing the thing, I should be able to get a little, I should need a little less incentive than I'd need someplace else. So that was, not looking for specifics, just if that rationality exists, or if it's just so bad a market that everybody needs the incentive or they won't do it.
Don't point at me.
And you can be free to say, I wish there wasn't a banker in the room.
Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know, that's a tough one to answer. I mean, no,
No, it was a friendly time till now, but.
no, I'm not- no,
Yeah, no kidding.
no, yeah, while like the average incomes in a market can be high,
Yeah,
it tells you that people can probably afford a higher level of rent. It doesn't mean that they are renters too. Again, I think you gotta look at all these different pieces together and evaluate, who's a renter in a market, what can that market justify? In smaller communities, the rent is lower. And you have, what infrastructure and what jobs are around there. I mean, there's all these things that kind of go into it that, so many different variables.
well, and I was gonna say the good thing for Elko New Market is you are close to the southern ring, which gets people into the metro for jobs and probably has a higher level of income than other communities. The bad thing is there's not a ton of industry here. So building a project like we're talking about, we have to feel comfortable that people are willing to drive out of Lakeville, Burnsville, Apple Valley to Elko New Market to go live because they want to maybe be in a smaller community, easier to get in and out of than up there, and maybe it's a little bit cheaper. But that's a risk that the developer has to take on is, is that going to happen? I mentioned one of my first things, when we're looking at the market, we're looking at jobs. And there's not a ton of jobs in Elko New Market, which can be concerning. Can we attract the people to move out of the South Metro? I think that there's enough there that would do it. Obviously, there's proof of that being done with another project. I will say we've done some projects in Faribault. We're doing one right now. And a lot of those people were coming from the metro down. But we started seeing vacancies when the Iran war happened and gas prices started taking off. Because people said, I'm willing to drive when cheaper gas, I was willing to drive from the South Metro down because I like to be in a smaller community, it's easier for me here. But when they start looking at, well, it's gonna cost me this much more, why don't I just live in the metro and not drive? And those are all things that you don't see coming. I didn't see that coming when we built those projects, so. But they're all things that happen and you can't plan for everything, you just hope that it works out, so.
Yeah, the rent question's interesting too, because, you heard these guys talk about, the hard surface countertops that they're not building in this market. So even though incomes may be what they are, they're able to keep rent down a little bit because they're not providing the finishes and the units that you might find in whatever, downtown Minneapolis or Plymouth or something like that. So the per unit cost, I think you guys were mentioning something even short of 200,000 in this market. You never build that in Minnetonka or Plymouth. Those projects need subsidy too. They're getting more rent, but they cost more. There's still a gap. You expect to have a hard surface countertop and the dog washing station in Minnetonka.
Yeah.
You may not get that. And,
May not get that here.
of course, those things cost money. How are you going to pay for that? You're going to have the same rent. Yes, a 2x4 costs the same no matter where you are, but you can save some money here and there, right? So, yeah. And you hit on a good question that Rebecca brought up about jobs, and I don't know, did you want to expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, and you started to go down that, but just that idea of, do the jobs come and then the additional housing follows, or is it the housing that when a new job or a new company is looking, they say we do have housing for our employees? Kind of that chicken
Yeah.
and egg.
Correct.
What do you see, or how do you evaluate that, and what do you see on that decision? Because you need the people to be there with their jobs, but the employers need the housing before they want to locate.
Yep.
No, I think that's the classic, balance, another part of the balancing act of all this is, what comes first? An employer would look at it, we need the density and the population there if we're gonna move our business there. But then, on the housing side, we'd look at it, we need some more infrastructure, some businesses, some jobs, so that's a tough question and tough as, you're looking at a project.
You offend her?
I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, but do multifamily developers chase single-family national developers? If you see a community, a small community in the outer ring, Norwood Young America or whatever, where all of a sudden Lennar and D.R. Horton and your Pulte's and now your Nationals are arriving, does that spark your interest?
I mean, I think I like to see that some of the publicly traded national companies are interested in an area. So that, I mean, that's kind of telling of, you know, they've evaluated and it's good for them, you know, so it's probably good for somebody else too. Yeah, I think there is a little bit of following, but I also would say that a good single-family market does not necessarily make a good apartment market too.
Correct.
You know, being more of a bedroom community, I think people are more interested in probably a single-family home and kind of moving out to more a rural area, the country, and buying a single-family house. And less so moving out for those same reasons, but moving into an apartment. I think there'd be other reasons that someone would move and rent an apartment. And I was kind of thinking about that, why? And I think, you know, one of the reasons maybe someone that's interested in moving to Elko New Market, but maybe not ready to buy, maybe wants to just get kind of rooted in the community and rent for a couple years and then buy. You know, that was one reason I maybe thought of, and that may follow some of the single-family housing development too. You know, if a family or friend is local, that would maybe draw someone else to maybe do the same thing, but maybe rent, or, that's just one reason, but I don't know.
And then when you were, at the very beginning, when you were talking about who your clientele seems to be, and I think you both mentioned senior people in the market rate, senior people and single people. So you're not really seeing families in the market rate. That's not as common.
Well,
Families with children.
we're, in the projects we build, not really. But we aren't building 3 or 4 bedroom units. You know, we're building 2 bedroom, 2 baths as a maximum, 2 bedroom, 1 baths. Sometimes you'll see some parents with a single kid that might do some short-term leasing of that, or a single parent that has a couple kids maybe, but we don't see a ton of large families move into our projects. I don't know what you guys see.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, I'd say the families tend to be more in what you'd classify as like the more affordable type, where, yeah, you have the 3 and 4 bedrooms, I think is where you see more of that. Versus like in a market rate, I think you see a lot less of that. And, you know, if there is a family, it's probably a young family that might, you know, a husband, wife, whatever, a couple that, was gonna buy in a couple years and maybe have a young baby. I don't know.
Part of it too is economics. Your studios get more rent per square foot.
Correct.
The bigger the unit gets, the less per square foot that you get, and so thereby increasing gap. So the 3 and 4 bedroom units are not as profitable as your studios. Of course, you got to serve what the market wants, but
Correct.
if you can do it, if you could build all studios and 1 bedrooms, the numbers work better.
How do you feel about mixed-use buildings?
Let's talk about data centers.
I'm gonna give you my honest opinion on them.
We're in the trust tree.
Yeah, generally, I have not seen them work. I've done a few projects in more like the urban Minneapolis, St. Paul area, and even those locations have struggled to find tenants. You know, project that we did in 2019 with a different company, commercial's still vacant.
Yeah.
I like like vertical mixed use, I think is what we're talking about. I think it's a good concept. It is very hard to make work. We built and now own a building in Jordan, which has some commercial, Sand Creek Flats. Building's 4 going on 5 years old or so, somewhere in there. Commercial still vacant. They're very hard. They're very, very hard. I think where the mixed use makes more sense is like horizontal mixed use. If you have a 5-acre property, you can do an apartment building and a couple commercial buildings. That's where I think the mixed use component works versus like the vertical mixed use where you have ground floor commercial. There's always the question of who the tenant's gonna be in the commercial space, what parking needs are the employees gonna need, what parking needs are the customers of that business gonna need, how does that interact with the residential building? you know, if it's a restaurant, you hope you had planned for a restaurant and have venting, you know, going to the roof. I mean, there's a number of things you can go down. So the vertical is very challenging. The horizontal, I think, makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, we won't build mixed use, it just doesn't work. And we look at Rochester, we haven't built in Rochester recently, but they're starting to require everybody to have mixed use on their first floors, and almost all of it's vacant in Rochester, which is crazy. The Red Cow at the Berkman's the only place in there, but the rest of them all just sit vacant because it was a requirement from the city. I think you're right on. When I talked about it earlier, amenities are nice, but amenities can be like a nice strip center next door that's got a coffee shop. Even a Quick Trip next door, you know, that's got, you know, people can run over and grab some milk and bread and do things like that. Those are more important, I think, for the communities we serve. We got out of Rochester, we were developing in Rochester, and then DMC came along and we saw the writing on the wall that it was gonna get crazy down there and the costs were gonna go up and everything was gonna happen. And so we've really gotten our niche working in communities like Byron, Casson, Dodge Center, Owatonna, Faribault, Clear Lake, Iowa, La Crosse, working through some of these smaller communities that it doesn't make sense to have mixed use in. And it makes more sense to work with them and try to locate something that makes sense where people can live a life, but there's stuff close where they can go grab a pizza or they can go grab a cup of coffee, or maybe there's a bar down the street and they can go have a drink, you know, things like that. But it's hard putting it in, that retail in the building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, you know, if you do lease a space, they tend to turn over quite frequently too. I mean, it might be a new business and they may be closed in 6 months or a year. So there's kind of a revolving door of that type of commercial use. The national type of commercial that you probably would want to attract is looking for something different in a lot of cases, and they have very specific criteria, you know, traffic counts, population density, I mean, all these things. So, I mean, they're very particular, and a lot of times they just wouldn't even entertain that. So it just, if you do find somebody, I've seen that they just, it's hard to keep them.
Now, I will say, Owatonna, there was a recent project built there called Ascend, and they have retail on the first floor and on the lower floor. But the first floor, the entire first floor is Olmsted Medical Center came into Owatonna and now has a clinic there. And that's a long-term commitment from them. That was the deal. The other part is it's a brewery that was down the street that was gonna lose the building. The building was gonna be demolished and they had to get out, and so they moved into this space, and they were able to work with the developer to put together a deal that made sense for them. But that's the only ones I've seen actually work in communities that are a little bit smaller, is just that one, because it was a medical clinic, and the guy that developed the thing liked to drink beer, and so.
Give him a discount.
We're the last stop on 35 for the Met Council jurisdiction. Does that affect us at all?
You work up in this area a
Yeah.
little bit more.
Well, I mean, there's additional fees for the Met Council. So, I mean, so there's that. Yeah, I suppose, I mean, you have to meet your density requirements too, right? And I mean, with your comp plans and how you develop is a little bit more guided by the Met Council. So I think it's just another component to how you plan and account for density and housing needs. Sorry, is that what you're?
Added cost.
So that's more on us than you guys wouldn't be looking at it saying, gee whiz, it's easier one stop down than here because they're more restrictive. It's more of us putting together compatible plans with them that might influence what you can do.
Right, yeah. I think with the Met Council, they will tell you kind of how much density you should be having on certain sites. Whether, and I think that's, whether you agree or not, kind of it's, kind of guided that way. I don't know.
Well, there's no extra expense to you because we're the last stop of Met Council. Correct? I mean, they
Outside of the Met Council SAC fees,
Yeah, there's-
$2,500 a unit more, so.
That's a lot.
It's, for us, it's $4,600 more.
Oh,
So, yeah, that's,
that's a lot.
Ryan's making a note.
Making a note, 4,600.
It-
We have a surcharge, like, so our Met Council fee is more than like Lakeville or Shakopee or whatever, so $46.85.
yeah, so that's very impactful.
So hopefully our city fees are less to offset some of that, because we have city connection fees as well. But some years ago, within the last 5 to 10 years, the city council, in effort to incent multifamily development, reduced the city connection fees by 25% of a normal single-family home.
I have another question. You know, you had mentioned, it's more desirable to be by commercial or good flow traffic. Looking at our city, where are you thinking, you know, would be the most desirable areas for a multifamily?
You tell me first and I'll write it down.
Well, I know of a few properties, that have been discussed.
I'll save you a little, you don't have to go into specifics though of
Okay.
where you're, I think from a general standpoint, like,
By the
you don't have to talk about specifics on the deals that you're
Yeah,
looking at.
okay, all right.
That we didn't, we
I
don't
was
wanna
gonna
put
go
you
in
on
some
the
detail.
spot
No,
like
I'm just-
that.
I do. I want
You can have that conversation later, Ryan. But just
I'm an
like
open book.
generally
No.
parts of town, you know, is it downtown, is it
by the
out here on the
freeway,
east side, is it up by the
speedway,
school?
Yeah, by the
What types
school.
of land uses do you wanna be adjacent to long-term, that type of thing?
Yeah, okay. Downtown, you know, probably pretty close to where the town center apartments are. Yeah, I'd say around the downtown to be the ideal spot for that.
I'm just waiting to hear it. No, I looked at it too, and I, you know, came through early and drove around the community, and obviously the ones that are going up on west end of town, there's a strip center there, there's a bar and grill there, there's stuff for people to run across the street and do. But it all depends on the community and what you are. We built 98 units in Clear Lake, Iowa, in a cornfield with a Quick Trip, kind of a half a block away, and it's full. You know, it's just, you just never know what's going to work. Could someone do something out by the Quick Trip? You know, hoping that growth's going to come that way. You know, that's an option, looking out there. But yeah,
You said Iowa,
Yeah.
middle of a cornfield, if you build it,
they will come. Yeah, exactly. That was the idea. It took longer to fill up than we thought, but it's full. So
And the answer to, could you build by Quick Trip? Yes, yes, you can.
yeah.
Other thoughts or questions? Anybody? Closing statements? Closing arguments?
Closing arguments. No, I appreciate the opportunity to come up here and just meet with you. I like these type of environments where we can talk back and forth freely and discuss these, not being contentious and other than Bob, other than that, but, it's good to get up here and see different properties, see different communities, work with what you guys have a hard job of trying to figure out how do we grow this community and what do we do? And how do we do it in a way that makes sense for our community? And that's not easy. Those are tough decisions that the electeds get in front of, people that, neighbors, friends, family members that could be mad that you're doing this project or an apartment project and stuff. But if you can do this type of planning that you're doing and make a roadmap for here's kind of what we see, here's where we want to see it, and you can lay it out, at least you've got a little bit of background cover that can help you in those situations where someone might say, I don't want to do that, or we shouldn't be doing that. But I appreciate you guys taking the time to do these things. This is a good idea to do these, roundtable panel type discussions, so.
Yeah. Yeah, likewise. Thank you for having this. I think this is a good conversation. I think there is demand for apartments and rentals. they're just tough. I think we've talked about everything, why they're tough, and, you know, I think in great detail. So again, I mean, it goes back to the city. I mean, it's the public-private partnership that makes these happen now, and I don't know when and if that will ever change. I think it's a good way to go about these, but it takes everybody working together. And I think slowly there's the misconception of rental apartments is changing too. I think there's sometimes you know, those are bad people, you know, or say it in some way, but that's not the case. Like I think we've talked about today, they're the teacher and the police officer. I mean, just it could be anybody, you know. So I think that through like a lot of these conversations, that is, you know, getting out there and realize. So I think it's good to do this. So, thank you.
Yeah, and thank you guys for spending an evening with us here tonight. We really appreciate it.
Yeah,
So,
no problem.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, both of you, for coming. It's very educational. We enjoy hearing all of the information that you gave us, so that's wonderful.
Good.
great.
All right, that's it.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep. Thank you.
Thanks, that was.
Thank you.
Okay, can we get a motion to adjourn?
Do you want to do that, or should we do the executive director's report?
I have nothing.
You have nothing? Okay, then I will get a,
to adjourn.
thank you. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.